Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our keynote fireside chat with Palmer Luckey. And, really some of the things that we want to cover today are how you build, create, and grow a business here in Orange County. So, Palmer, you don't really need any introduction, but, could you tell the audience where you're from and, your history with Anduril and obviously Oculus?
Sure. So I started a company called Oculus VR when I was 19 years old, living in a camper trailer. Built that originally here in Irvine and then sold to Facebook for a few $1 billion, moved it to Silicon Valley for a few years, and then came back down here to start my second company, Anduril, so that I could work on defense technology, and been growing that company here again too. So I have quite a bit of experience growing companies in Orange County.
So, that's an intriguing component. So you sold it, Facebook, Silicon Valley. Why'd you come back here to start the company, to start Anduril?
So there's quite a few reasons. One of them is, Orange County isn't known for having low cost of living, but it's a lot cheaper than living in the Bay Area, especially if you need a lot of industrial space, if you need a lot of manufacturing space. And so that was a small part of it. But I think the biggest reason is that when I started Oculus and I was in Irvine, we got really good at convincing people from all over the country to move to Orange County to help us work on virtual reality. And when we moved to the Bay Area, there's a few nice benefits. Like, there's a lot of technology talent that's already up there. And so if you want to hire technology talent that's already in the Bay Area, then the Bay Area is a great place to be. But it's actually very hard to get people to move from the rest of the country to the Bay Area. If someone lives in Austin or Boston or in Florida and they're not in Silicon Valley working in the tech scene, there's probably a reason that they aren't in Silicon Valley. They probably don't necessarily want to be there. So when I started Anduril, we came back here partly because it's so much easier to get people from across the country to move here. No matter where they're starting from, everybody likes the beach. Everybody likes Disneyland. Everybody likes reasonable cost of living, good infrastructure, good schools, good housing, and kind of the ideological sanity that comes from being a hub for defense work and for law enforcement work. It's not like the Bay Area where there's a lot of people who have no exposure to any of those things, and so you deal with a lot more friction in the process.
Yeah, so that again an interesting comment, because what we're seeing a trend is we're seeing companies that are headquartered or have put a big location. I'll use SAP as an example. SAP is obviously their U.S. headquarters are out of the Philadelphia area, yep. Newtown Square. They had a pretty large presence up in the Bay Area, but they've decided to really grow their West Coast presence in Orange County, in Newport Beach specifically. And so we're seeing
I think they're looking at a lot of the same dynamics. These aren't things that I'm uniquely seeing. It's not like it's not something that I somehow magically figured out. There's a lot of people who understand this, and I think that you're going to continue to see a lot of movement towards places like Orange County over the traditional tech hubs like Silicon Valley.
So, I've been here a little bit over 5 years now at Octane, and when I first came in, and I started meeting with our board, with our partners, with our sponsors, with the ecosystem, I started to hear that there wasn't really an ecosystem here, and frankly, I started to believe it, and that was one of those moments that I said, "Oh my God, what did I get myself into?" And as I went through this, I began to realize that we've got actually a wonderful ecosystem. It just wasn't connected, and it wasn't as functional as maybe some others. And then people were saying, "Well, hey, do you want to build this to be like Silicon Valley?" And first of all, that's not my job. It's not Octane's. It's such a heavier lift than that. But I kind of look at this and say, to some extent, that's maybe a fool's errand. Shouldn't we just say, let's be the best version of ourselves? And if we're number 2 behind Silicon Valley, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, in general, you should try to be the best thing, not the thing that somebody else already is. And I don't know if we're going to be number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, but there's no chance that we're going to get to be number 1 by doing the exact same thing that somebody else does, someplace else does, when they have totally different dynamics that are driving that climate.
And with a big head start, obviously, too. So what would the things be that you would see or think that we could do really well here? We thrive in medical device, but if we move over to the tech sector, cyber's obviously strong, and that's your industry, and AI. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I mean, I think that one of the most important things to do is to try and keep people here who are being successful here. One of the worst, most damaging things that can happen to the Orange County tech ecosystem is for people to start companies here and then go elsewhere and have all of those. When companies go elsewhere, eventually people start leaving, they vest out, they start their own next company, they go to work at other companies, and if they're doing that in another place, then it doesn't really matter that the company got started in Orange County. It's kind of, it doesn't really benefit Orange County, and it doesn't benefit the startups that are there. So I think one of the most important things we can do is not like, I think it's important to try to get people to come here, but it's even more important to retain the people who are already here and already doing work. They've already been convinced to work in Orange County, so they're going to be the best people to convince.
Yeah, and a lot of that ties into capital and the access of capital. And one of the things that we've seen is that out of the capital that Octane helped launchpad companies raise last year, which was about $350 million, all but 3% of it came from outside the area. And it's kind of right to your point. And almost half of it came out of Boston. So when you think about that, the LPs of those VC firms are pretty much Northeast. The fees all go back there. The carried interest once there's a sale, and I'm getting a little background here. And from that standpoint, those companies, don't really contribute to the economic development of Orange County. That's really what we need to do a whole lot more.
One of the issues with the Orange County investment scene is that a lot of the money comes from family offices, private offices that are very, very conservative. And like that served them well. That's how they made their money. That's how they've kept their money. A lot of real estate people, a lot of energy people, but especially a lot of real estate people.
And real estate people want to walk into what they own. They don't want to.
Right.
They don't want to see it on a piece of paper.
They don't want to necessarily see it on a piece of paper. They don't want to put it into things that they don't understand. And there's a lot of people who would rather put, they'd rather put money into something that has an 80% chance of doubling than a 10% chance of 100xing. And that's you can adjust those numbers here and there, but the reality is, even when there's more money to be made net with a riskier strategy, there's a lot of people who are just very conservative and they don't want to invest in those kind of high risk, high reward type of bets. Silicon Valley has a lot of people who are different there. A lot of the money that is there is money that's willing to, spend money to make money, take a risk to potentially win big. A lot of the venture capital funds there are seeded or even significantly funded by family offices of entrepreneurs who have made a lot of money in tech, and so they've done it and they understand it. I think that's one of the fundamental divides here, and why I say it's so important for people to stay here, because eventually, if the people of Orange County who are starting these companies stay in Orange County, they're eventually going to be the people who are putting money into these funds. But as long as it keeps being kind of asking for money from outside of tech to put into tech, we're going to continue to struggle.
So
to put it another way, I basically have no Orange County money in my company because it's not worth it. In my experience, so I don't want to sound too arrogant, but fundraising for me has been pretty easy. I was very strong at Oculus. We had a very strong exit. My new company is doing very well. And when we talk to Silicon Valley investors and East Coast investors, we were many times oversubscribed for our last round of fundraising, which we did at over $1 billion valuation. And when we would talk to them, there was so much interest. There was way more committed. We had more commitments than we had room in the round for, and so we had to kind of slice and dice and figure out how we were going to make room for the people we really wanted in. And when we would talk to investors that were in Orange County and be like, "Hey, here's what we're doing," they'd say, like, "Oh, well, we're going to need to think about this for a few weeks, and we're going to need to run it by all these people, and we need to see all your detailed financials." And I was like, Look, you don't understand. I don't have to do any of that. I could just go to get a check right now. There's a bunch of people banging down my door. I'm not going to sign myself up for a bunch of work and a bunch of of drama for a fund that honestly probably isn't even going to be able to get their heads around it. And for that reason alone, forget companies that are trying to raise money and can't find anyone to raise money. Even companies that can easily raise money aren't able to raise it in Orange County because it doesn't make any sense. And so that's been a little bit my experience.
Yeah, and again, you bring up a point that we hear time and time again is the investors here want to see a revenue trajectory based off of actuals. They want to see EBITDA. I mean,
I totally understand that. That's the business that they're in.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have to understand that it is going to have a negative impact on the tech scene because a lot of the most promising companies, like they're promising because they haven't yet hit that exact revenue curve. And actually, in my case, we started fundraising. We were raising around. We were saying, hey, we're going to be closing this big deal. It's going to be a huge deal. We have a few more deals coming later this year. And I'd like the Orange County conservative investors. I was like, well, we might be interested after you actually close those. I'm like, no, we are going to close them. And we did. We closed a $200 million deal like a week after we closed our round. And a lot of them were like, oh man, I wish that we could have had the chance to invest, after that deal. I'm like, no, that was the whole point was that I was raising before. Like you don't get to come in after the risk has been boiled off and cut in line in front of the people who were willing to bet when there was risk.
Well, there is definitely a risk aversion factor, which we've got to get past because there's a lot of wealth here. Yeah, there's a lot of wealth in Orange County. It's just not directed to the industries that we're trying to create and build.
Well, and we need more risk-tolerant people to be wealthy in Orange County. Like, I don't think that it's necessarily going to be. I don't think the solution will necessarily be convince real estate people that they need to take more risks. I think that you can't really. I don't know what's the right adage here. I don't know. There's something about teaching old dogs new tricks.
Old dogs new tricks, right?
Something like that.
You can't teach an old dog a new trick, right? Something like that.
Yeah. So I think what we're going to need is to have people who intimately understand risk themselves becoming wealthy in Orange County so that they can seed all of these funds in the future.
Yeah, I mean, if real estate's worked for them their whole life, they're not going to veer too far off of that. That's for sure. So when you raised capital for both Oculus and Anduril, Bay Area, East Coast, you had mentioned both of them. What kind of a split was that?
Mostly Silicon Valley area.
Yeah.
A little bit of money from the East Coast, a little bit of money from Texas, but almost overwhelmingly people from the technology industry, and they happen to be concentrated overwhelmingly in the Bay Area. So
I want to get to another topic, is that a next generation of leadership here. And really, right after you and I talked today, we're going into a panel that discusses activating Gen Z, activating millennials. I mean, you're Gen Z, actually, right?
I'm 27 years old, whatever that translates to. I don't keep up with that stuff.
So, but it's a younger population, and to some extent, it feels like we're starting to age out here in Orange County too. And so, I think there's an opportunity, and we've gotten together a group of really talented leaders that are younger. And what we're trying to do in this whole thing now is to say, hey, who's the next generation leadership that steps behind some of the bigger names that have been community leaders, industry leaders, philanthropic leaders, but more importantly, retaining and attracting that Gen Z workforce. We've got a great university ecosystem. How do we keep the people here and supply them with jobs and opportunities so they don't drift off to the Bay Area, New York, or any other number of places? I know you have an opinion on that.
Well, when it comes to tech, sometimes I feel like I'm aging out, so I can only imagine how you feel. I'd say that for my part, I give people jobs, and I try to attract the right type of people, and I try to give them the tools they need to be successful in my company. And I hope that eventually they're going to start other companies in Orange County, and that they're going to stay around. I think that Orange County, this is maybe too controversial for here.
Let's do it.
People need to stop trying to make the airport quieter, and they need to let the airport go to more places. They need there to be more flights. And I say this not because this is the most important thing, but because it is kind of a representative thing that applies to everywhere. There's a lot of people in Orange County who want Orange County to stay the same. They want Orange County's character to not change. I understand that, and I can respect that. But if we're just talking about the question of how do you attract younger people, especially in technology, and keep them around, there's a lot of things that could change. So you have a lot of people who say, no, we can't ever change the airport. We have to limit the number of flights. Like, if the airport could be down to 2 flights a week, there's people who think that'd be the best thing ever. I think that it's the same thing even where I live in Newport Beach. There's people who want to maintain the character of it, and they say, oh, we want it to be an old beachside Mediterranean style town. And I'm not saying this is what we need to do, but it would be a lot easier to keep young people if it were built up like Miami Beach and they built some big high density buildings and we were able to bring people here and have them live cheaper, live more densely, get the network effects that come along with that. And so there's going to be this tension between people who want to keep things the way that they are and people who want to change things in a way that's attractive to a new generation. And I don't think that a lot of people, they say, oh, how do we attract people? And you mention these things like, oh, but that'd be horrible. We can't possibly change that. And what it boils down to is they say, I want to attract people that are totally different than our current demographic, but I also don't want to change anything. I just want to convince them that they want to live like a retiree. And that unfortunately is probably not a winning strategy in the long run.
Well, we'll talk further about this at some point, because as we're activating this, we really want it to be a movement, and it's individuals like myself. And you're right. I mean, I'm the older. I'm a baby boomer, and so, all I can do at this point is help activate that younger generation and try and step out of the way, because I think that's, to your point, that's what we need. We need this next generation to step up, and we need it to change. And we talk about a creative corridor. We talk about being edgy. All those things are not inherent in the Orange County culture.
No, I agree. I mean, another thing to throw out there would be, I know a few places that are working with Uber on the Uber Elevate program, where they want to start doing vertical takeoff and landing air taxi service. There's people who are trying to make Irvine part of that, who are trying to make that happen here. We have some of the infrastructure for it. We could already do it. And already it's running into instant opposition. People say, no, we can't do that. We don't need more things in the skies. And it doesn't matter that they're going to be much quieter, that we can come up with really good corridors for automated VTOL aircraft. And I think that's going to, again, this is not like the thing that's going to change everything. I don't want people to say Palmer thinks that if we have Uber Elevate, it's going to bring young people to Orange County. But it's just a representative of the endemic problems where people don't want to do these new things and they fight them every step of the way. And unfortunately, the cities that do these things are going to have a huge advantage, because they're going to be painting themselves not just as good in that moment, but they're going to paint themselves as the place that you go to live in the future. They say, not only are we going to have VTOL air taxis today, imagine what we're going to have tomorrow. Look at us. We're the forward-looking city. We're doing interesting things. We have private sector investment, public investment, and we don't have residents that try to block every change at every step of the way. So I'm hoping that Orange County can get closer to the right side of that equation.
Is that an example of maybe Austin or Boulder?
Yeah, Austin is a good example. And I'd say Austin, Denver, those are places where they're very open to these things. I don't know. I have too much insider knowledge of Uber Elevate to talk about the specific locations, but there's a lot of places where they are being embraced with open arms, not only by local officials, but also by residents who, by and large, think this is the most awesome thing ever and that it's going to be really cool. They really want it to happen. And I think that, aside from the real transportation effects, which are going to be basically negligible in the first few years as they scale up the program, that's irrelevant. It's really more showing the attitude of those cities where, a young entrepreneur leaving college is going to say, where am I going to go? Where am I going to set down roots? Where am I going to be able to build a business that's innovative and attract other innovative people? And they're going to go to those places because of things like that, multiplied by dozens of different items.
So, if I think about one of the things I'd like to talk about here as we move through this discussion this morning is AI, creating, whether we want to call it an AI supercenter or a hub. And I kind of take us back. This has been an area, Orange County, that's been really well known for medical device. And if I dive in a little bit further and go to ophthalmology, this is the epicenter for ophthalmic innovation in the world. And so when you have a conference, when you have an event, you've got the top CEOs, you've got the top investors, you've got the top entrepreneurs that enter Orange County, live here, work here, develop here. As we talk, and there's a lot of momentum about emerging tech and AI, how should we approach that? Because we want to play a very active role, and I think as you and I were talking earlier, this is a community lift. I mean, there's a dozen organizations that all need to participate equally in that, and way beyond that in terms of engagement deep into the markets. But in your mind, how would we go about doing that? What would be the tenets of building that kind of a hub?
I'll caveat this by saying, remember, I'm 27 years old. I've started 2 multi-billion-dollar companies. That's pretty good, but I don't know everything. And like, this is one area where I'm way outside of my area of expertise. So when people think what I say is dumb in this area, they should understand that I'm really reaching here and trying to provide that answer.
Come on, you're never reaching.
Oh no, I reach all the time. That's how I make my money. But I do think that artificial intelligence has a lot of applications that make sense. It also has a lot of applications that don't make sense. And I say this as somebody who had working in the VR industry saw a lot of a similar dynamic where there were companies that were using VR because it was actually the best way to solve their problem. And then you had companies that were using VR because it was very hot, because it was very cool, because everyone pays attention to it. Every company wanted to say, we're doing some VR thing or we're doing some AR thing. I think that we're starting to see that with AI now, where you're having a lot of companies say, oh, we're doing AI too. We have this machine learning team. We're doing things in this, we're doing things in this new way. And for a lot of these companies, it doesn't actually make any sense with the current state of AI for them to be doing these things. They're doing it primarily as innovation signaling. They're like, look how innovative we are. We're using machine learning. And I think what companies should do is, rather than I know this is easy for me to say, like, when I started Anduril, we were like, AI was not nearly as hot. It was like 3.5 years ago. So like, people were talking about it, but it wasn't anything like it is today. We were using it because it truly was the best way to solve a lot of the military's problems around complex sensing, sensor fusion, and command and control issues. I think that one of the things that would be helpful here is to recognize where AI can actually be the most useful, and for people to focus their investment on those areas. I think AI can be hugely useful in medicine. We already have a really strong lead in medicine, we especially in ophthalmology. Let's figure out how we can use artificial intelligence in things that we are strong in and make ourselves even stronger. I think that's a much better strategy than saying, hey, we're going to figure, like, hey, I don't have any particular company in mind in Orange County, so hopefully I'm not stepping on anyone's toes that's actually doing this. But like, I know there's a lot of companies like WeWork that have said, oh, we're using artificial intelligence to identify the best deals in the real estate market and invest in them. And then they actually had some people come out from that team and say, that's not true. There's no AI. It's just like 8 people in a room, and we look at the deals. And I think that type of honesty is really helpful in making, basically, I want the right companies that are creating the most value to get the investment and to do well. I don't want them to be diluted by companies that are really good at pitching how AI is going to help them, but are not actually deriving significant benefit.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right on that, because AI, my concern is you can group AI in emerging tech, but does AI become maybe second rate 3 years from now or 4 years from now? Are we talking about...
Of course it will. Yeah. And I think that, like, AI is going to be everywhere, but it is not going to be this crazy hot thing where if you're doing work in AI, everybody wants to invest in you than it is today. And you saw the same thing happen in virtual reality and augmented reality. You had a lot of companies that were talking about how they were doing AR, augmented reality and virtual reality, and they were really just using it to get hype. And unfortunately, a lot of the worst companies were able to steal the most oxygen out of the room, and that hurt the really good companies. There are some companies that were very good at marketing what they did and saying that the future was going to be revolutionized, but they didn't have any substance to back it. We have to look at the substance.
And even when I look at our accelerator, one of the data points that we had found was we had about 37% of the companies that came through last year were in AI in some form or another.
That number is going to go down even as AI becomes more successful. 10 years from now, when AI is everywhere and having bigger economic impact than anywhere, there's no way you're going to have 70% of companies in an accelerator be doing AI stuff, because all the people who are doing it for hype reasons are going to fall out, and you'll have a few companies that are doing it for real good reasons, and everyone else is going to be using it as some tangential thing, but they won't be able to say, oh, I'm using AI. Yeah. I think another kind of similar example of this was companies that were talking about like cryptography, and that was really hot for a while. Like, oh yeah, we're doing all this encryption, blah 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 blah, or even the blockchain. And it's eventually the technology became kind of commoditized, and everyone's actually cloud is an even better example. For a while, it was all about cloud. It's everybody's. Oh, we have a cloud component to our business.
Like it was revolutionary, right?
But now, you could say, 95% of businesses work with work in the cloud. It's like, yeah, that's just how it works anymore. But no company's going to raise money on that. And I think AI will be the same way. Everyone's going to be using it, but nobody's going to be able to raise money off of hyping that they're using it. It's just going to be like, I drive a car. It's like, of course you do. I don't care.
I agree with you. And even when I said that 37% number, what we found when we dug deeper is they may be applying it or have applications for it, but they're not really creating it. And so everybody's going to use it. It's like saying, I'm on the internet. Well, no kidding.
Yes, exactly.
It's not a big deal.
That's the even better analogy, yeah. Yeah, in the future, nobody's marketing their company saying, we have a website. That used to be a selling point.
So anyway, I want to thank you. I'd like to wrap up here and obviously give you an opportunity to close out also. But I really want to thank you for being an inspiration to our community. Those that are younger, those that are older, I think you've shown everybody what's possible as an entrepreneur, and that's something Octane really supports. But really, what's possible about building a business here in Orange County? I mean, you've been the tip of the spear in terms of that over the last couple of years.
Yep, we need a few dozen more people like me, and then we'll be in a really good set.
Okay, so does everybody hear that? We love Palmer. Palmer's done great work. He's created a lot of jobs, but we need more Palmers.
You need way more.
And you support that too.
Oh yeah, I want to be made obsolete. I hope that someday I can't keep up.
I'm getting obsolete. So anyway, Palmer, thanks very much. Really appreciate you spending the morning with us here and supporting what we're building together here in Orange County.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.